It starts off with this very high-tech syntho-sequency type thing, like this. That's the news. And the strings take the melody. Out is the counter melody. Big finish.
I got chills. Wasn't Tom great?
Well, it worked. Worked.
To me, that's the sound of the pitch meeting for every single theme song ever in the history of broadcasting. That's from Broadcast News. We're going to get to that in 2 seconds because Morning Edition has a brand new theme song. We'll tell you all about that. Just quickly before we get going on that, I wanted to quickly bring you up to date on a few other things you may or may not know. First of all, The Gist with our friend Mike Pesca is turning 5 years old today. 5 years old. And he's been a great friend to our show and I'm often a guest here. So happy birthday. I tried to look up something better than The Gist that happened 5 years ago today, and I discovered that Coke and Pepsi, that's a real Pesca kind of thing to do, to look something like that up, you know? So Coke and Pepsi got rid of something called brominated vegetable oil, which was which was a flame retardant, which for some reason or other was in their soda, and which if you drank too much of it could give you memory loss and fatigue and ptosis of the eyelid, which I personally hate getting. So anyway, happy birthday. You're better than getting rid of brominated vegetable oil, BVO, from soda. You're better than even that. I also want to say that as a Red Sox fan, I'm very happy that Alex Cora, the manager of the Red Sox, has officially said that he won't attend the ceremonies celebrating the World Championship of the Red Sox at the White House. And now Country House, the winner of the Derby, the controversial winner of the Derby, he's also saying that he will not go to the White House either. I don't know that they necessarily always invite the horses. All right, so we're going to move on. It is time to talk about the Morning Edition theme song. Adam Ragusa is going to help us out, journalist in residence and visiting assistant professor of journalism at Mercer University's Center for Collaborative Journalism, and an expert on all things, I can't say all things considered, all things public radio, and has written quite a bit about public radio and hosted a podcast about public radio. And Adam, because you can just see around corners, you knew this was coming. You were one of the few people not surprised this morning when Morning Edition had a different theme song. Tell us why.
I don't know if I'm allowed to tell you entirely why,
right,
but it's safe to say that the trade publication that I have worked with sometimes that covers public broadcasting news, Current, has known about this and been in possession of it for a while. And I got to hear it a long time ago and developed some thoughts in addition to all of my things on my glistening resume that you just read off, where journalism occurs in my title 3 times,
right,
so you know I'm legit.
And I didn't even mention food, all the food videos and stuff, too.
I know. I'm a YouTube star.
Yeah.
Adam Ragusa at YouTube. You got to go. Anyways, that's a new thing. No, but I'm a composer, like, by training. Like, that's what I went to school for. And I still write music for shows as kind of a side hustle. So that's why Current asked me to write about the new Morning Edition theme that everyone is freaking out about right now. No doubt WNPR's board has been lit up all morning with cranky people in Greenwich or whatever, waking up to change because we fear change. But I think we should stipulate, like, right up front that 20 years from now, when they're going to be doing the Colin McEnroe show, at that point, I assume it will be the Kai and Wolf show.
Right.
And
with
the
a
ASEG is going to be,
co-host.
oh my gosh, they changed the beloved 20-year-old classic Morning Edition theme with its throbbing club beats that remind me of my youth when we were all on Molly and America was innocent. So let's just stipulate that up front.
All right.
That,
so
like,
what we need to do to set this up, I think, is now to play these two so that they can understand what it is that you're speaking. I personally am still using Molly, but that's a whole separate issue. So here's what you've been listening to since 1979. All right, you remember it now. Now, I hope you know, retain that musical memory, because you are either going to agree or disagree with Adam Ragusea on a very important point. Here is, as of today, the new theme. All right, so you get the idea.
Big finish.
Big finish. Yeah. So, so Adam, your argument here is that this is not so much a completely fresh composition, because we can hear the notes, kind of in the second or third movement in there. You can hear the very familiar notes of the original melody. You really see this as simply a different kind of. It's like a cover version of B.J. Liederman.
Variations, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's the NPR hype machine, which the New York Times in their article about this new theme just bought hook, line, and sinker, is pushing this as a new theme. I do not think that it is a new theme. If it's a new theme, then someone should be able to point me to the new theme in the freshman music theory sense of the word. That is to say, a complete musical idea, generally a melody that forms the basis of a composition or section, right? What is the thematic material in that is not B.J. Liederman's original ba-ba-ba-ba-da-da-da, like melody, right? It's all based on that. And indeed, the people who made it, I talked to this woman named, what's her name? Emmy Crawford, who was the creative director, not composer, creative director at the Sonic Studio man-made music that produced this new branding sound. Let's not call it music. No, that's too harsh. I'm sorry. I think it's good. I think it's really, really good. I
thought you were going to go positive here.
I know. No. It's just, to me, it's like there's something of it's something of a microcosm of how far NPR has come in its 50 years or 40 years, 50 years since when the days when they hired this American University kid, B.J. Liederman, to kind of write something for basically no money in exchange for perpetual on-air credit that he will continue to get, by the way, I am told. We've come so far from those disorganized days when NPR was just a bunch of hippie kids running a radio station to now where corporate hires a sonic branding firm that has 4 or 5 in-house creatives working on the new, sounder package or whatever, they call it. I mean, I don't know. I mean, it's inevitable. Things grow up. People mature. Whatever. People move on. They grow up. They change. Colin, it's not you. It's me.
All right. So, just to emphasize what Adam was saying, there isn't a single composer. There's sort of this diffusion and perhaps even plausible deniability there for this company called Man-Made Music, which seems a little gender specific, but Man-Made Music has, as Adam just said, 4 or 5 in-house creatives involved in this project. So no one person, if you want to get mad at somebody, well, I hate that theme you wrote, you can't get mad at one person because he can just say, oh, no, she wrote it. Actually, well, that part that you don't like, which is sort of weird. I don't know. You're the composer, but I just since when is it like that?
It's a thing. I mean, it's a thing.
It's a thing?
I mean,
Okay.
I guess this is the company that made the IMAX bass drop sound that everybody knows.
Oh.
When you go to the IMAX theater to watch the latest Marvel abomination or whatever, and it goes, and your head explodes. They did that.
Yeah.
There's firms that do this kind of thing. And again, I feel bad because I think that they did a really good job. And they did a very good job in trying to meet a whole bunch of competing objectives that are just, it was an unsolvable puzzle to try to like create a new theme package for Morning Edition. And by the way, to kind of square the circle on that, that's not the expression. I don't know what the expression is. But to come back to the thing, like Crawford herself said that like they were what was commissioned of them was an evolution of the Morning Edition theme, not a new theme, which is how the New York Times uncritically parroted this claim. I mean, this is not the first time there's been a new arrangement. Forgive me for correcting you, Colin, but the first bit of clip music that you played there was not the original Morning Edition music from 1979. That's the smooth jazz rearrangement. The thing that I actually do really agree needed freshening. It always to me sounded like something like the musical distillation of like Darien, Connecticut coffee shop, right? Like,
hey now.
It's like it was like the whitest thing on NPR, and that is really saying something. No, the original version was this more kind of like Baroque music sounding thing that BJ did. And so it's changed before. It's changes perpetual. And yes, this is like a more distant, more adventurous rearrangement of BJ's theme, but I still think it's fundamentally BJ's theme, and I don't think that people should be all that freaked out about it. I think it does a good job of kind of freshening it all up and making it sound au courant while not really offending anyone's sensibilities and not doing what I was afraid they were going to do, which was really pander to people's sensibilities and just like put, I'm in Georgia, south of Atlanta. I was afraid they were going to like come down to Atlanta and like steal a trap beat and put it on there or something, just to really pander to some demo that they're going to go after. Like, I think it's inclusive. It has sort of nods to various cultures' musics in it. I think it's good, but like, yeah, it's a classic thing of like when you try to make something that is for everyone, it ends up being for no one. If you try to do something that's everything, it ends up being nothing. And I don't think it's not their fault. It's not the composers' faults.
Mm-hmm.
I think that they did the best they could with the assignment they got.
Right. So if it ain't Baroque, don't fix it. Now somebody sitting in a Darien coffee shop just went, Muffin, what's a trap beat? He just said trap beat. See, you're confusing people now. I just want to say I'm gonna let Adam go in 2 minutes. He's got to run somewhere, but I'm also going to stay here for 5 more minutes on this topic if you guys want to call in about this. 860-275-7266. 860-275-7266. Come on, Darien coffee shop people. It's time to vent. You didn't like this change. Or maybe you do. Maybe you just want to kind of make building a dugout canoe maybe while you're listening to this super world music thing. Although I do agree, Adam, with one of the people in your piece, Amory Siverston. I don't know if I'm saying that correctly.
Amory Sievertson. She hosts the podcast Endless Thread from WBUR and Reddit.
So to your previous point, she said it sounds like they had some interesting production ideas and they took all of them. And to me, all
the ideas, all of them.
It's neither
you get an idea, and you get an idea.
It's neither fish nor fowl. It's a little bit like, I don't know if you've heard the theme music to the Slate Culture Gab Fest, where they hired a composer and to try to incorporate all of the sensibilities of the three hosts, and that's exactly what the composer did, and it doesn't therefore sound particularly unified.
Yeah, that poor guy. They documented that whole new process like in an episode, and I felt so bad for that poor guy because he's a really good. Yeah. I know his work. He's a really good composer, and they were just like, "Hey, can you make it like this and like this and a little bit like this and a little bit like gamelan and a little bit like birdsong and he was just like, "Okay, I've got a word salad I need to make into a tune," and he gave them exactly what they asked for, which is all you can do for your client,
Yeah. All right. Well, I'm sure we're going to get used to this, and that we will be better people for having gone through this change. I know you've got to run, so I'm going to let you do that. Adam Ragusa, journalist in residence, visiting assistant professor of journalism at Mercer University's Center for Journalism, and more journalism even, and also a composer and does food stuff on YouTube. So that covers pretty much everything, I think. So now you run, you go. I know you have to run home, so you go do that. We're going to let you go, and I'm just going to. I've got 5 minutes that I can build into this conversation. We have 2 other topics that we're going to talk about as the day goes along, and we can go to them sooner rather than later. But I feel like this is the kind of thing where we might get calls. So 860-275-7266. Did you notice the new theme music today? Or maybe you just heard it just now. And if so, what did you think of it? 860-275-7266. This is all going to happen in the next 5 minutes, so don't waste time. All right, here's Madeline in Stamford. Hi.
Hi.
So?
I just heard the new theme music, and I'm calling to say I don't think it's at all good.
Okay.
I think it sounds a lot like something, somebody playing with GarageBand would do.
Mm-hmm.
And it's more like New Age music, but there's no melodic theme that you could grab onto and internalize.
Right.
And that's what good music does.
Right. Well, I mean, you can hear, as I said, the notes of the main theme as it goes along there. But I agree that it seems like a layering of a bunch of electronic music styles that are meant, in many cases, to copy world music styles on more basic analog kinds of instruments. And so it does have that problem of trying to be everything. And if you try to be everything, as Adam was endeavoring to point out, you are nothing.
I think if they had done something that a person would enjoy singing to, that would be much better, because that's what it really comes down to, whether you can.
But you didn't ever sing the old B.J. Liederman theme, did you?
Oh, I could. I mean, I couldn't sing it to you off the. But
I just, like in the shower maybe or something, you would just kind of la-la.
Yeah, the first few seconds are kind of amorphous, but when it gets down to the core of that which part I mean, the good part.
Yes.
It's wonderful. It's a really great melody.
All right. Well, Kyone Wolf is agreeing with you about the singing part, that you should be able to sing it. Here's Jordan in Pawtucket. Hi, Jordan. You're on the air.
Hi, Colin.
Fire away.
Well, so I didn't hear the theme this morning, but I just heard it on your show.
Yeah.
I think it's a nice idea, for them to want to like freshen it up, and they kept the old theme in there and everything. I just want to comment on how I think it's really funny that that people out there would be so up in arms about such a seemingly minor change, something innocent and like meant to just keep it fresh.
Right. Although you sound young. I don't know how young you are. The older you get, the worse you are at adopting to anything. Something moves like 3 inches in one direction and it just ruins your day. So it could be something, and public radio listeners, although they are not exclusively gray-haired, long-in-the-tooth people, they skew a little bit that way. And they're probably not going to dig the kind of EDM, sound that's kind of there. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Well, let me be the first then to call this scenario happening where people call it an attack on something.
Yeah. All right. Yes, you did. You did do that. All right. So let me just get to Gail and Ava. I'm going to run out of time pretty soon. Oh, this is good, because I actually do think these theme songs should be focus grouped by dogs. So let's hear. Do we have a report from the canine world right now, Gail?
Yes, we do.
Okay.
Actually, I no longer have a dog, so that this is just pay attention to this, just a heads up.
Okay.
You are neglecting the whole an important part of your audience, which is the pets and even perhaps small children. We had a dog who responded to the All Things Consider theme song because that was when she expected to be fed.
Ah.
And when the time change occurred, you can picture me flying through the house to turn the radio down because this was her thing. And this, of course, is something that occurs in the morning. And now that it has changed, I can imagine gastric distress amongst dogs whose gastric juices have not been stimulated by the expected theme song.
Well, it's all about the food with them. Everybody says, oh, Fufu loves music, but when you get right down to it, it's totally Pavlovian. They're not music appreciators. You could be anything. It could just as easily be Van Halen, as long as there was a pork chop on the other end of it, right? It doesn't make any difference to them. That's why you can't go with the dog vote on these things. All right, we're going to quickly take 2 more calls, and then we've got some somewhat more serious topics to deal with, I promise, as we go along here. Here's Ava in West Hartford. You have the floor. Oh, but you need to turn down your radio. I'll tell you what. Turn down your radio because it's going to mess with your mind. I'll come right back to you. I'm going to give the floor instead right now to Rose in Bethlehem. Hi, Rose.
Hi, how are you?
Good.
That's good. Well, I want to say is I really like the change. It's not really a change. It's like a revision. It's very lively, and as an older person, listening to it, just driving here, I'm listening to it. When I was listening to it, I thought, gee, this is really kind of a good wake-up call, you know? So, I really like it. It's got a nice beat to it, and I think it would attract the younger group of people that listen in the morning, but as an older person, I really like it. And I'm really into music. My father and my brothers were guitar players, and so the beat is really, really nice. It's a good wake-up call.
All right, great call, Rose. It does sound like some Amazonian tribesmen persons making some dugout canoes so they can go down the river to a rave. I think that's sort of how it plays for me. All right, we have to take a little break here. We're going to come back. We're going to get a little bit more serious. We're going to celebrate the life of somebody who died young, made an incredible impact, though, on the contemporary world of evangelical theology and attitude as practiced. Okay, we're going to get a little bit more serious here, maybe a lot more serious. Although this person that we're about to talk about, my sense of who she was, is that there was an element of playfulness that went along with an awful lot of what she wrote and talked about. You may not know this name, Rachel Held Evans, often referred to as R.H.E., especially for compactness purposes on social media. She died at the age of 37 on Saturday in a hospital in Nashville. This all had to do with an infection and a reaction to antibiotics, apparently. But she had a big impact on the world of evangelicals, particularly evangelicals who were trying to square their participation in a religion, often a participation that had been, really part of the fabric of their lives. Their parents and grandparents had been evangelicals. They'd gone to Christian summer camps and learned a whole bunch of songs and gotten familiar with a whole bunch of things. And then as they hit a certain point, some of the patriarchy, some of the attitudes about LGBTQ persons, some of the over-reliance perhaps, or selective reliance on Scripture started to bother them. How do you deal with all that? Well, she was there to help people. She was a best-selling author. And here to talk more about her and more knowledgeably about her is Ruth Graham, staff writer for Slate, who covers primarily religion. Thanks for joining us, Ruth Graham.
Thank you for having me.
So say a little bit more just to kind of help people place Rachel Held Evans in the firmament of writing about Christianity.
Sure. So like you said, she was an author of 4 books, but she was also well known as a blogger. She'd been blogging for more than a decade, and also a popular speaker at conferences and churches. So she had a lot of different platforms. But she wrote about, every issue kind of intersecting in any way with contemporary American evangelicalism. So theology, culture, politics, every kind of hot button topic. I think in the piece I called her a forceful and winsome public voice for progressive evangelicalism. So her own religious journey started in really conservative evangelicalism. She grew up in Tennessee and went to a small conservative Christian college there. And she wrote over the course of her career kind of about her own spiritual evolution out of that conservative evangelical space. And actually, by 2014, I think she, formally stopped calling herself an evangelical, and she belonged to a mainline Episcopal church, but still just had a real presence. Like really spoke to people still in the evangelical community, and also people, like you said it up really nicely. People who had roots in that community but felt either rejected by it because of who they were, they felt turned off by it, disillusioned in some way, but still, kind of felt connected to that faith in some way. And she was really, a voice for people in those middle spaces, very transparent about her own wrestling with faith and doubt. But still really, Rachel loved the Bible, loved Jesus, and she was able to just really be in that middle space and be a voice for the many, many people there with her.
She seemed to be, I should say, first of all, that as many people listening to the show know, and we actually did a whole episode on progressive evangelicalism, and although I haven't been going to church lately, when I do go to church, I go to a church that kind of fits that description. And many of the communicants there are people who are gay or lesbian, who grew up loving all of the ideas, beliefs, and tropes of the evangelical church, but then found that once they understood their own identity, they were being told that their identity wasn't loved or accepted the way other people's were, and just were trying to square that. And it's a gigantic problem for people who aren't willing to turn loose of everything they were brought up with. It seemed as though that RHE was also able to do this. I mean, it's a pretty fraught thing, and you can get into some real fire-breathing arguments about this. She seemed to be able to do it with humor and humility that isn't often one of the condiments that go along with this conversation.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. It's an unusual combination in my experience to find someone like her who was so attuned to injustice and so, spoke and wrote with such clarity about what she saw was wrong in the world and in conservative evangelicalism, but was also so relentlessly, cheerful. She was funny. She was warm. It's really been amazing to see over the last few days the number of people who she sparred publicly with in some form or another, just coming, out to sort of talk about how she was able to do that so respectfully and warmly, and just in a way that I think is really unusual, particularly at this particular moment in time. She was just respectful and direct and always had this sort of sense of good humor and seeing the humanity in everyone she debated with. And at the same time, never shying away from that debate, and speaking what she saw as the truth with real directness.
I can sort of say this as conjecture without knowing it for sure, but Nancy Butler, who was my pastor and the biggest spiritual influence on my life, and who also died young of ALS a few years ago, I guarantee you that she'd read everything that this woman had written, because they are just peas in a pod. And she became a pastor and went to a divinity school a little bit later in life, not as her first choice of professions, but discovered it later. And one thing I think that you're seeing today, Ruth, is people going on Twitter or wherever and talking about pursuing ordination with this particular writer as a source of confidence and inspiration?
Yeah, absolutely. It's incredible the number of ordained women who have come forward over the last few days crediting Rachel with influencing their journeys to leadership, whether that's by keeping them in the faith, just through her writing and her speaking, and making clear that there was space for them within Christianity, within American evangelicalism, but also, her making a very forceful case for women's leadership, or just by directly encouraging them. That's another thing, is she just was incredible, for being such a high-profile public figure. The amount of people who have stories about her receiving just a little encouraging note from her. She was very active on social media and, just in the comments of her blog, and just was able to touch a lot of people directly. Another thing that, again, this has really become clear, especially over the last few days in these public testimonies, but she really used her platform to an extraordinary degree to elevate other women, especially women of color, also LGBTQ writers. She had this big platform, and she really used it just relentlessly to elevate people who aren't usually granted those kind of platforms in Christian spaces. So that's also just been something that's emerged and is pretty incredible to see.
So, Ruth, one of the things that has been a source of tension within the evangelical movement of late is that as a whole, as a mass, it's attributed to, or it's sort of given the quality of having endorsed the candidacy and presidency of Donald Trump, a man who appears to personally embrace very few things that we would associate with the sort of personal ethics of Christian evangelicals. And there have been a lot of questions from the secular press. Well, how can you guys line up with this guy? He's everything that you say people should not be, and none of the things that you say that they should. What did Rachel Held Evans have to contribute to this conversation?
Sure. I mean, she was very outspoken about just her grief at seeing, as you said, the incredible support. When you look at the numbers, white evangelicals supported Donald Trump at really high numbers, and that was something that grieved and angered her. And again, I think that's an area where she was able to give voice to thousands and thousands of people who felt that same way. And these might be people who no longer identify as evangelicals, but again, have a complicated relationship within their past, or have, still feel connected to the church in some way. And she was able to articulate that with a real kind of, I would say, righteousness. I saw a couple of people calling her a prophet online this weekend, which is an interesting way to think about her. So yeah, she was very outspoken about that.
Actually, she was called a prophet in a radio interview at one point, or maybe a podcast interview, and she laughed and said, "I'm not a prophet. It hasn't cost me nearly enough." The idea being, if you're really a prophet, it's going to take something out of you in a big way. So just lastly, I mean, one of the things I think that progressive evangelicals wind up bringing up is so much of sort of evangelical orthodoxy is justified by a doctrine sometimes called sola scriptura. If it's not in the scriptures, then you can't do it. Or if it's in the scriptures, you must do it. And if it's forbidden in the scriptures, you can't do it. But everything is sort of based on what's there in text. And it's such an easily exploded issue, because what's there, particularly in certain books of the Old Testament, would lead to kind of an unworkable lifestyle if you try to follow all of these things. So that's why I said at the beginning, scriptures sometimes rather selectively quoted by so-called fundamentalists. And this is something that she really played around with, up to and including, I think, a one-year experiment where she really tried to live by all those rules.
Yes, her second book, I think it was A Year of Biblical Womanhood. And she went through the Bible and cataloged all the rules, Old and New Testament, for how women were supposed to behave. So Proverbs 31 is a famous chapter about, what a good Christian woman is, and all these Levitical rules. And she just went through the whole Bible and, sort of took them on one by one. So I think for a month, she would camp out in her yard when she had her period, to sort of separate herself according to Levitical rules. And, it was a very, she had a serious point with it, which is about biblical literalism, as you said. But she also, had a lot of fun with it. And I think, to me, that so captures a big part of who she was and her work, which is, making a serious, deep theological point, but also having a lot of fun with it and doing it with such good humor. So yeah, that was one of her projects. And that was something, the idea of biblical literalism, she wrote about a lot. There's a post of hers I just was rereading this weekend where she goes through and finds all of these, old quotes from Christian leaders about how the Bible says, using the Bible to prove things like, opposition to interracial relationships. And, she was very pointed about, articulating the ways that the Bible has been used to, supposedly sort of prove all of these now, things that now contemporary evangelicalism totally rejects. So just the fact that the Bible can be used to almost any end, she was, had a lot to say about that.
So, Ruth Graham, we're in the days of mourning the death of Rachel Held Evans, but probably conversations like this one and what you wrote in Slate magazine may help people discover her work if they haven't already read it.
I hope so.
Yeah, that would be great. So we're going to end this segment with Saturday, a poem written by Rachel Held Evans. You're going to hear her voice reading it over music by the liturgists.
The question gets answered too quickly, or if the silence goes on too long, please know you're not alone. There are other people singing words to hymns they're not sure they believe today, other people digging out dresses from the backs of their closets today, other people ruining Easter brunch today, other people just showing up today. And sometimes, just showing up, burial spices in hand, is all it takes to witness a miracle.
Scott Breedy, the scheduled producer of this episode, is under the weather, so it's a bird, it's a plane. Super Betsy Kaplan stepped up this morning and produced it with help from me, Kyone Wolf. You know, that whole it's a bird, it's a plane thing makes me realize how many people had uncorrected vision problems when Superman first appeared. The part of Bill Curry was played by B.J. Liederman. On tomorrow's show, our wild and crazy tribute to Elvis. And now, back to Colin.
Yeah, I want to second that emotion about Betsy Kaplan. Scott was going to be doing the show today, and this morning we got the email that he's under the weather and can't do it. And Betsy jumped in, and we really have had a lot of fun and gotten to some pretty serious stuff here on the show today. We're going to get even more serious, if that's possible. Right now, we are going to talk a little bit about something you may have seen in this morning's news. Because of a UN report, we now know that for the first time that over 1 million species of plants and animals are facing extinction, which is directly linked to human activity. So joining us to talk about this is Walter Yetz, a professor of ecology and evolutionary biology and of forestry and environmental studies at Yale. He also runs the Yetz Lab. He is the co-author of a new Yale-led study showing the percentage of threatened amphibian species is higher than previously believed. So kind of a subset of this overall UN Intergovernmental Science and Policy Platform report that came out today. And it's been their study has been published in Current Biology. So, it has been said in the past that of the many species that have existed on Earth, and estimates of that could be somewhere around 50 billion species. More than 99% of those have been made extinct at some point. They've disappeared. So sometimes people joke that all of life today, when taken in that context, amounts to not much more than a rounding error. But we can be cavalier in that way, but I think we have to be very serious right now. We are being told about a rate of extinction that I think exceeds anything we've seen before. But Walter Yetz, tell us more about this. You are aware of the UN report. You're also obviously in possession of your own research. If you wanted to convey to a casual listener the seriousness of this situation, how would you do that?
Hi there. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be on the program, sure. And happy to speak about this topic. And it's been interesting, actually, to your question, to be part of that very assessment that was published today, and the media coverage was about today as well as this particular study. And what we really are concerned about as authors of that assessment, as well as this paper, is the multiple threats that biodiversity is facing today, the many different impacts species experience, and how that has already led and is going to continue to lead to species extinctions and on an increasing scale. And these extinctions, as you made the point about species will always go extinct, it's correct. Species are going extinct on an ongoing basis, but these extinctions that we're encountering now are orders of magnitude more than we would have expected just from natural processes. So species are going extinct. They are going extinct because of us humans, of our activities, and I can say more about that in a moment. But importantly, they're going to extinct at a much, much greater rate than would otherwise be expected. And we humans will be less off because there are a lot of benefits we're getting from nature, and we're losing these benefits one by one, and in many cases, unfortunately, without even exactly knowing what those may be in the future. So it's a very dramatic situation right now.
Right. Just to stay with the amphibians for a second, I mean, give people a sense numerically of what you're seeing compared to what a normal rate of extinction would be.
So we've had about 2% or so of amphibian species that have gone extinct since about the medieval times, and they're gone for forever. So about 2% of the amphibian species that were around in the 1500s are not with us anymore. And that may not seem like very much, but on a usual background rate, we would have expected about perhaps 0.1% or less of species to disappear. So we're talking about dozens and dozens of species that are in some cases species that have performed known services and functions to ecosystems, and in other cases have not. There's some species we don't even have a color photo of. We don't even know exactly what they looked like. There may be a specimen or a description somewhere. So we've already lost a lot, and amphibians, by the way, are the worst off group among the ones that have been assessed among the animal groups that have been assessed so far for their extinction risk. And what's so concerning is that we know already many more species are committed to extinction. We're identifying some of those newly in our study, and some of those have already been identified before. About 30% of all amphibian species, there are about 6,500 described to date, with hundreds still being described every year almost. About 30% of those species are considered threatened at the moment, and about another 25% actually, it hasn't been known what their threat status may be, and that's what our study addressed.
All right. So, yeah, we lost 2% over the span of 400 or 500 years. Suddenly, we've got 25 to 30% facing possible extinction in a much, much, much shorter window. As you say, orders of magnitude bigger. So how much of this is attributable to human activity?
Well, either directly or indirectly, pretty much all of it. As I mentioned earlier, the usual background rate would be in the well below 1%. Now, what's hitting amphibians is a whole range of issues, and they're really getting it from all sides. That's why they are among the worst impacted animal groups so far. So there is, first of all, a loss of habitat that we're seeing worldwide. Deforestation would be the obvious one, but we're also losing wetlands worldwide. Amphibians obviously restricted usually to wetter areas. Other primary habitats are getting lost worldwide, and particularly so in the tropics, where there are specific hotspots or centers of diversity that have, in some cases, seen some protection, but in other cases are sort of ground zero for all sorts of new developments, be it for infrastructure or agriculture or urban expansion. So we're seeing all of that impacting amphibians. Number two is diseases, actually. So amphibians are, because of their quite delicate physiology, if you will, they have a very sort of semi-permeable skin, as we all do, but they're particularly easily affected by pathogens. There's a certain fungal pathogen that's been taking out species after species and is threatening many, many more. And that is being spread further by human activities, and particularly also invasions, which in some cases may impact amphibians directly. So newly introduced species, or as we know, that lighthouse keeper's cat, not so much relevant for amphibians because there are not that many on islands, but other species such as rats and cats in other places have been, or even introduced toads of certain types have been knocking out amphibians. And finally, climate change. Amphibians require usually high humidity, very particular microclimates, and of all species assessed so far, they're among the worst in terms of existing and then projected risk of climate change-driven extinctions.
I mean, one of the things that the UN report, I think, makes clear is that these are not just things that are happening to plants and animals and not to human beings. That ultimately the big bill that comes due at the end of all this is one that will hit human beings very hard. I mean, if you eliminate mangrove swamps and coral reefs, you're going to have a lot more flooding. That across the board, these extinctions that we're looking at, these 1 million extinctions, will directly, I mean, they have been directly or indirectly caused by human beings. They're also going to directly or indirectly affect human beings at some point, I assume.
Absolutely. And it's the connection is obvious and easy to make for something like mangroves, but it's actually pretty evident in many other cases. And it's both evident in terms of sort of the direct as well as the more indirect effects that these extinctions will have. So think about amphibians representing wetlands, for example, and places where we are looking at services performed by these ecosystems, such as water provisioning, water cleaning, as well as erosion prevention. So these are in many cases places that are getting impacted that are of great direct relevance for humans. And the amphibians going extinct alongside are just sort of another symptom. But it's also the amphibians themselves, or species, individual species, that convey important functions and services to the ecosystems, and via that indirectly, in some cases even directly to us humans. So sometimes these sorts of connections are easier to make for a pretty-looking, fluffy mammal that we can all connect with as something that may have of cultural benefits to us that we consider as aesthetically beneficial. There are many plants in the tropics that have already been shown to harbor important medicinal value. And you may think a frog, may not offer that direct benefit, but there are a whole range of amazingly beautiful and frog species that actually have local value in indigenous communities and cultures that sometimes have already been recognized directly for the pest control functions that they convey. So amphibians obviously feed on insects, and in many cases it's just not even known yet how critical a given species or a set of species may be to a local ecosystem. So looking at originally estimated about 30%, and now through our study actually shown well over 40%, so 42 to 45% of amphibian species globally committed to extinction, unless we are doing something about it, is a really troubling picture indeed.
All right, we're going to have to stop it there. We've been talking to Walter Yutz, professor of ecology and evolutionary biology at Yale. We promised to come back to this too. We need to have a lot more conversations about what we do to stop this. I wanted to end though with this song, which I heard last night. It's a song by Mark Arelli, who performed last night at Infinity Hall as part of Jim Chapdelain's big megastar concert for various good causes. It's called By Degrees, and he wrote it about gun violence, but it's about how things happen by degrees and we tolerate them, we don't notice them. It's a great metaphor and a great way of describing what we just talked about what's happening to our environment, our climate, and the extinction of these species. So you'll hear some various famous voices, because I'm going to shut up right now.
We can learn to live with anything when it happens by degrees.
I've seen sadness seep into my heart, each day a little more. This darkness growing so familiar, I can't recall what came before. My children's faces filled with questions, looking up expectantly, and I don't know what to tell them. No, I can't bring myself to tell them that you can learn to live with anything. When it happens by